Bord Gáis Energy, proud sponsors of the GAA All-Ireland Senior Hurling Championship and GAA Legends Tour Series of Croke Park. Hashtag hurling to the core.
Hello and welcome to the Throw-In Independent.ie's GAA podcast in association with Bord Gáis Energy. I'm Will Slattery, delighted to be joined as always by Michael Verney. Michael, hello.
How's it going, Will? Just recovering the breath after that hurling weekend. Anybody that was putting the nail in hurling's coffin during the league, they've gotten a strong rebuke over the last couple of weeks, I can tell you that.
But it was funny because hurling semi-final weekend has been one of the marquee weekends of the year. The last couple of years we've always been treated to pretty good games, and so with 3/4 of the Cork and Kilkenny game, it looked like we mightn't get it this year. But then lo and behold, the 6-point lead for Cork, the most dangerous lead in a hurling semi-final, and we got that absolutely Kilkenny-like finish as well. It was my first game back in Croke Park since before COVID. I was just there with a Cork friend of mine as well. You can imagine his reaction when that ball went in. It was just an amazing atmosphere.
Crazy noise, crazy noise, considering there's only 24,000 there, and it's just that thirst that people have for action now at this stage. But even the Waterford Limerick game on Saturday evening, just the noise there at different stages with some of the big hits, particularly from Waterford in the early stages. People are just absolutely crying out for it. It was great, and we're set up for a real mouthwater in that Ireland final as well. Hurling final between Limerick and Cork. It's just real exciting weeks ahead. And this is I kind of said it before the championship that I thought this could be one of the best years of hurling we've had in a long time. And if we get a big All-Ireland final, it won't be too far off. Yeah,
there's one thing, and it's funny, at the start of the year when we were talking, we spent so much time talking about hurling officiating. Then, like yesterday, I felt like Fergal Horgan kind of let so much go. It was the kind of physical style that we all like to watch when we're watching hurling. He blew a whistle if there was a trip or a high tackle, but if there was this kind of man-to-man physical combat, he seemed to let a lot of that go, which is what people want to see, I think.
Yeah, people want to see the whistle swallowed at this time of the year. Maybe just need to just be more smart about what they're doing in the league, and just like try and officiate more like championship rules in the league rather than trying to be too stringent and changing the game. Like, we have an amazing game. It's amazing people were giving out about high scoring games. I don't think anyone was giving out about it yesterday. It was absolutely enthralling stuff. And we want to see that kind of hip to hip stuff. You see the ball moving quickly up and down the pitch. We don't want to see referees as focal points. And it's going to be interesting to see who gets the hurling final, actually. Who's the referee in the hurling final now? Because it's an all-Munster affair, Fergal Horgan probably would be the obvious one. But traditionally down through the years, All-Ireland semi-final referees haven't got the final, I'd say, apart from James Owens maybe 2 years ago. So that's going to be interesting seeing. It'll play a big part in the final as well.
Yeah, for sure. But for now, we're going to dig a little deeper into the All-Ireland hurling semi-finals, and we're delighted to be joined by Mullane and Frank Roche for our chat. Guys, how are things?
Morning.
Yeah, good. Thanks. Delighted to have you guys with us for our chat. We have an All-Ireland final matchup now of Cork versus Limerick. John, I know your county were obviously involved in Saturday evening against Limerick. We'll come to that maybe a little bit later. We might start with the maybe more dramatic of the two games, Cork versus Kilkenny. Cork looked home and hosed once again in an All-Ireland semi-final, 6 points up, which for Cork seems to be the most dangerous lead they could possibly have. Some fight back from Kilkenny, but ultimately Cork get over the line in extra time. How are you reflecting on the game this morning? There were so many ebbs and flows in that second half, and in the extra time period, it was a thrilling game.
Yeah, an absolute thrilling game. But I think overall, 80-odd minutes of hurling, I think that the best team won. And I think, from a Cork point of view, and from a final, a spectacle point of view, I think we've probably got the two best teams in the final. Well, look, probably Waterford might argue about that if they didn't draw Limerick. But I think Cork, we've been talking about it the last couple of weeks. This Cork team could be extremely dangerous. I've been banging the drum about them that if they get into Croke Park, if they get on a run, and they get a bit of momentum behind them. The Rebels are the Rebels. The Rebel roar was back yesterday. Cork hurling is in a very, very good place. Their dander is up. They're hurling very, very well. They can be extremely dangerous opponents for anyone. And I think yesterday they just had that bit of smartness. They had the pace, and I just think they had the overall, as a package, I think they had better hurlers in Kilkenny yesterday. And I think when it came down to it, in that extra time period, I think all those attributes shone through in the end. And here we are now. We're going to be in for a a thrilling final now with both Cork and Limerick.
Frank, is there an argument to be made that even though it probably didn't feel like it for Cork fans while it was going on, that, you know, being pegged back and going to extra time and having to dig deep and kind of maybe exercising some of the demons from 2018 with the extra time period, that ultimately the way it played out could benefit Cork going into the final? Or is that just a positive spin on them kind of collapsing a little bit again?
Well, it is a little bit of a spin, but I think there might be some truth in it too, because one of the big questions facing Cork over the last few years really has been questions. There have been questions about their character. You know, were they up for it when they were really challenged? And you can just imagine the mindset, or how the mindset could have been after 70 minutes yesterday, because I think even more so than 2018, yesterday was a case of Cork frittering away a huge advantage. I mean, even in the few minutes before Adrian Mullane got that goal, Cork had several more chances to put the game beyond reach. And they didn't take them. There was a few wides, wrong options taken, balls given away. Then Patrick Horgan had the 65 that he'd been nailed on to score at any other time in the game. And if he'd scored that, it wouldn't have mattered, like, you know, what had happened in the last play. But I think Cork's response to that was huge. And, you know, the response as well from some of the players who were directly impacted. I mean, Tim O'Mahony was probably the chief guilty party for, you know, taking too much out of the ball when Cork had possession, and he lost it, and that led to the goal. But he was a colossus in extra time. You know, Patrick Horgan had gone through a little fallow period late in normal time. You know, he delivered again in extra time. But the contribution of the bench as well was enormous from early on in the second half to finish with 11 points from play. Obviously, Shane Kingston leading the way, but that was probably the ultimate difference. And it means that Cork have lots of very, very, very good options going into the final. You might even say maybe more so than Limerick, because their subs have been tested and have been required more so than Limerick's bench has.
Yeah, Michael, it leaves, I suppose, Kieran Kingston in an interesting selection position with who to bring in, what way they play the game in the final, given how strong that bench was. Like, how do you reflect on where Cork are now after yesterday's game? When their running game got going in the second half, I know they ultimately missed most of those goal chances, but they look very, very threatening. You know, how good a position are they in going to that final? Like, you know, what are your overall thoughts on where they are?
Yeah, no, I think they're in a damn good position. And just to kind of echo what Frank said there, you know, you can win a game kind of falling over the line, and it almost feels like you're there and you've won, but it almost feels like you haven't won. So they ended up, you know, having their lead snatched off them in normal time, but they powered on in extra time. Fair enough. Now Kilkenny probably had a couple of goal chances. You know, Walter Walsh had a goal chance, and James Bergen had one as well. Cork, that's definitely something that Cork will have to tidy up on. But they have improved with every game and continue to improve. And just what you mentioned there about Shane Kingston, yeah, he'll probably start the final. But Shane Barrett, who had contributed 1-3 or 1-4 from the bench in 3 games, he'll be an option off the bench then. So they're not going to lose, you know, they're not going to lose an option off the bench. It'd be interesting to see whether Alan Cadigan starts. If he doesn't, he's a massive impact coming off the bench as well. And it's like gas, like to think, you know, the two Cadigans, I'm sure it was a somber enough kind of mood in their household leading up to the match. Then all of a sudden the two of them are on the pitch by, you know, the 40th minute, and they're both delivering huge performances. But I think Cork are coming into this in an absolute perfect scenario. They had patches of the game that they'll look at and will not be happy with, particularly the last maybe 15 minutes of normal time. Like, I looked at it on the hour mark and I genuinely thought that Cork were going to win by 10 points. They were absolutely streaking away from Kilkenny. Then all of a sudden, Kilkenny dropped back Conor Fogarty, shore up the defence. Cork maybe, I think they had one point from their last 7 shots on goal in normal time. A bit of panic. But isn't it great when you're in the situation where you've panicked and made mistakes and you've still come through that? And they were able to weather a storm of being 6-2 down at one stage and getting back to 7-6 up, and been 19-15 down at one stage, and they weathered that storm as well. So yeah, I think Cork are coming into it in a perfect scenario. And on the flip of that, yeah, like Limerick's bench probably looks light. Cork look like they have options everywhere on the bench, and they've everywhere on the pitch as well. So I think it's primed for a brilliant final.
And they're possibly more battle hardened going into the final as well. Like, you know, I mean, they had a bit of squeaky bum time against Clare, likewise yesterday. And as Verney touched on it, Will, you know, what way would you rather, you know, win that game yesterday? Is you know, they had a bit of a setback, but they regrouped. They regathered in the dressing room, came out all guns blazing in the second half. And I think, you know, they're probably best equipped going into the final rather than Limerick. You know, probably I wouldn't say they weren't tested against Waterford. They blew Tipperary out of it in the second half, and you know, they won the Munster semi-final with a bit to spare against Cork the last day out. But there is probably one setback for Cork, and I think it's the injury to Gerald Melrick. Gerald Melrick, for me, I really like this lad, and I think, you know, it's going to come down to it, who's going to pick up Cian Lynch. And he's the one guy that would be on your lips that would go and mark Cian Lynch. And I think, you know, from a Cork point of view, I think he's going to be a big, big setback for him if he's not going to be able to take part in the final.
Yeah, and a few other guys came off with niggles as well, so hopefully they're okay with the final as well. And John, just a word on Kilkenny and the comeback, you know, the most Kilkenny of Kilkenny moments to work that late goal for Mullane. It was a fantastic moment, unless you were a Cork fan. Like, you know, the quality of the team, as people have said, probably isn't there to other vintages, but the battling qualities to get that kind of extra time was pretty sensational.
Yeah, but that comes down to the man that's standing on the sideline, Brian Cody. You know, I mean, how often have we seen it time and time again where, you know, a Brian Cody team, you think they're gone. And I was actually at home, I said it to the wife, I said, this game is not up yet, 6 points. I said, Kilkenny won't go away. And they kept tipping away, point, another point. And then it was a 3 points lead. And a 3 points lead, you know, going into injury time is a dangerous lead when you're coming up against a Brian Cody Kilkenny team. And look, it's only to be expected from a Brian Cody team. I think, you know, he couldn't have got any more out of that team yesterday. For me, I think Brian Cody is getting every inch out of that team, and he done the same yesterday. Now we're probably going to hear the banging of the drum now for Brian Cody to go, and ultimately I think it'll come down to, you know, himself whether he wants to go, and I think that he deserves that. I think from a Kilkenny point of view, I said it last week. I said, you know, how good are this Kilkenny team? It was very hard to judge him off the Leinster success. You know, Wexford nearly beat him. They bet a depleted Dublin team. And look, that's back-to-back Leinster titles for Brian Cody. And I just think there has to be a small bit of realism with Kilkenny supporters. You know, where this team are at the moment. You know, Verney touched on it. You know, when we were doing the preview campaign and the championship, you take Owen Murphy, TJ Reid and Pádraig Welch out of that team, and they're very, very ordinary. Very, very ordinary. You know, look, we're here now. You know, where's the next TJ going to come from? Where's the next Henry going to come from? Pádraig Welch. I'd be saying the opposite. I'd be saying, well, where's the next Richie Power going to come? Where's the next Eddie Brennan going to come? You know, where's the next Michael Fennelly going to come? You know, those are the type of players you need. Jackie Terror at the back, a bit of steel. And they're not there, Will. They're not coming through. You know, you've seen it. You know, I've watched a couple of their under-20 games. They're not coming through. And I just think Kilkenny, they're at a crossroads going forward for the next couple of years. And, you know, they can keep banging the drum about getting rid of Brian Cody. But for me, I still maintain over the last couple of years, he's done an incredible job. And to win a Leinster title, to finish top of the league this year, get him to a semi-final, you know, to go and compete against Cork yesterday, bring him to extra time, you know, hats off to Brian Cody, you know, an incredible job he's done over the last couple of years.
I just say on that, Will, as well, like, I think talk of Cody being pushed out and like that is absolute madness. But I think if there's any doubt in his head about whether he should stay on, I think now would be the perfect time for him to go, personally. Over the last couple of years, you know, they've won a league title in 18, they beat Limerick in 19, back-to-back Leinster titles. Fair enough, they were beaten in 2 All-Ireland semi-finals. They died under shield the other day. I don't know if anybody can get much more out of this team, but he has maxed out his team. If he is any doubts about his thirst or energy for the job, I would personally like to see him go when they're not on a high, but they're definitely not on a low. And I'd love to see it, unlike with Mickey Hart in Tyrone, I'd love to see him, not being pushed out or anything like that. I'd love to see him go on his own terms. And when he walks away, to be happy with his decision and happy where he's left Kilkenny, because he has definitely left them in a very, very strong position based on what he's working with.
But I'll be strange of him. I'll ask you the question. If he does go, and look, I'm not suggesting he should go, because you know my stance on Brian Cody and how I feel about Brian Cody. But just say if he did walk away and the time was right, like, I don't see too many lads putting their hand up and saying, Jesus, I think I'd like to go in and take over that job. Like, so like, who would take over the job? I know it was me, or it was anyone else, and you're thinking with your clever hat on. You saying to yourself, well, I'll hold off a couple of years. I won't go in there yet. The personnel is not there. Like. So who would be best equipped to take over? Like?
Yeah,
and do the job that Brian Cody is doing.
Yeah, I do think it's the same as in Tyrone. I don't think you'll hear any ex-players putting their hands up and saying, I want to be the next Kilkenny manager. But I do think, like, just based on what he's done with Ballyhale and the regard that he's held in, like, Henry, you would imagine, is the natural successor. But I don't think he's going to exactly put his hand up and say that. But it's going to be interesting over the next couple of weeks with the Tipperary situation, Kilkenny situation, the Waterford situation. There's going to be a lot of moving parts over the next couple of weeks. I'm not saying Brian Cody should go, but I'm saying that if there was a right time for him to go, that now would probably be it.
Yeah, it's an interesting debate, and I think if he stays on
the
one
other
more
thing
year,
there is
go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, the interesting thing there is, like, people talk about Kilkenny and transition, but in a way, what's facing them in a year's time or 2 years' time could be the real transition. Like, TJ will be 34 soon enough. John mentioned, TJ, Owen Murphy, Pádraig Walsh. When the pillars of the team, when they depart, it's what's coming up behind them. Like, so Kilkenny have, under Cody, remained incredibly competitive over the last few years. I mean, if you just think about it, they're the only team who've, with the last team to beat Limerick in a straight knockout championship match. And they followed that up with back-to-back Leinster titles. But, it could get even more difficult for them in, a year's time, 2 years' time. And, getting to this stage of the championship could prove a lot more problematic for them.
And I think if he stays on one more year, I think he'll have overtaken Sean Boylan as the longest serving inter-county manager as well. Not that would probably be.
I don't think he'd be too worried about that.
Yeah, just for the people in the media who might enjoy those sort of statistics. But Frank, I suppose, I know you were at Limerick Waterford. I think the way you described it in your piece, I thought was very well put, was 7.5 minutes of kind of borderline perfection, or kind of power hurling that kind of changed the game from 4 points apiece to 10 points to 4 to Limerick, and they kind of kicked on from there. Was that for you? Was that when the game kind of swung?
Oh, totally. I mean, it was slightly different, but it had echoes for me of the football semi-final between Dublin and Mayo 2 years ago, when I think there was 10 minutes of total destruction by Dublin that time. They outscored Mayo by something like 2-6 to no score, or thereabouts. Limerick didn't do it with goals yesterday, but you always got, or on Saturday, but you always got the sense that once Limerick got 5-6 points ahead in that game, they were going to close out the game. They were never going to be under threat. And that's all it took. I mean, it was that 7.5 minutes from, Austin Gleeson equalised for Waterford in I think it was the 20th minute or thereabouts. And it came from another turnover, and you're thinking Waterford they're still in this. Even the nature of how they were getting scores. But from there on, they were just blitzed, and the other thing is there was a succession of Waterford puckouts in that second quarter, and Limerick won the vast majority of them, especially when Waterford went long, and they just turned the screw completely in that period. And several of the points, even though were kind of typical Limerick points, it was they won the ball in their own half back line. It was short, then long angle delivery, forward friendly, be it to Seamus Flanagan or whoever, and over the bar it went. And the game went away from Waterford totally in that period.
Yeah, I think you highlighted the score. Peter Hogan got on the ball in the attack for Waterford. He was dispossessed quickly down the field, and Seamus Flanagan hit an unbelievable score. And they actually kicked on to extend their lead to 17-7. So it was a 13-3 run they went on, which, as you said, was the winning of the game. John, from your perspective, from a Waterford perspective, I know you were confident or hopeful of a potential upset or a strong challenge for you. Where did the game get away from Waterford?
Yeah, it was the first quarter. Frank touched on it there. We were 4-3 down after the first quarter. We invested so much into that first quarter, and when we should have been possibly 3 points up after that first quarter. And if you really dissect the game, the landscape of the game possibly might have changed if we went into that water break 3 points up. And I'm just going to go from a player's point of view. Verney can touch on it as well. If you're a player and you're after investing so much into that first quarter, you're going into that water break and you're kind of half down yourself saying, well, look, what more can we do? We're at the throwing the kitchen sink at these lads, and we're still a point down. Whereas if they went into that water break 3 points up, right? The Limerick purple patch is going to come, but you're going into that water break, then you're saying, lads, we're 3 points up. You get more energy. You get more energy within yourself. You say, right, we'll go at this now for the next quarter, and we'll see where it takes us, and we'll review it at half time. And if there were 3 points up after that water break, granted Limerick we're going to have a purple patch, right? Instead of going 8 points, going in at half time 8 points down, you could have possibly been only 2 or 3 points down. And then everything changed at half time. Even the conversation the managers having at half time, everything changes. And we know how good Waterford are in that third quarter. So if they were only 2 or 3 points down at half time, then all of a sudden you're approaching that third quarter and you're saying, well, look, lads, we're well within this game now. We'll go and attack this third quarter. And I thought Waterford were very, very good in that third quarter. They were winning that third quarter by 2 points until they got hit with the sucker punch with Mullane. Ozzy was going through on the 51st minute. Probably could have taken another step or two. Now it's easy for me to say that would have brought it back to 4. Burns went up and hit us with a free out right over the touchline. The Cusick stand pushed it out to 7. So when we were trying to just get it back to maybe 4 or 5 points, and the crowd were well up for it, Will. They were well up for it. I tell you, I don't know what lockdown has done to the crowds, because there's 24,000 there yesterday, 24,000 there Saturday, and it was like being in a new camp or Wembley Stadium, 80, 90,000. It was incredible. And look, there's going to be 40,000 there 2 weeks' time. The atmosphere will be incredible. And I just think if we got it back to 4 or 5 points, the crowd were well up for the Waterford crowd. Crowd would have got behind them. Who knows what could have happened. I just think we couldn't get it back to that 4 or 5 point margin. 4 or 5 points going into the last quarter. Who knows what could have happened. There's an awful lot of talk saying that the 4 weeks, 4 weeks possibly didn't help them. Yeah, but was it the reason they lost? I don't think so. I just think that first quarter was so crucial from a Waterford point of view. But look, what was most pleasing from a Waterford point of view, they never gave up. They kept fighting to the end, and that just goes to show you Liam Cal. But I just think from a Waterford point of view now, I think it's crucial now that we hold on to Liam Cal and Mikey Bevins, and whatever the county board have to do in the next week or two. I think from a Waterford point of view, I think it's crucial we maintain Liam Cal for the next 2 years, because we're knocking on the door. We're the second team in the country. You throw in the Burke to come back. There's a couple of nice players coming through. Erin Daly to come back. Paddy Malley. We don't know what's going to happen with Sock O'Keefe on the goals. This Corrock Daly is a very, very good player. Mark Fitzgerald. Our minors are in the final tonight. I'm going to that minor final tonight against Cork up in Thurles. I think that's going to be a cracking final. So I think Waterford hurling is in a very, very good place, and we will be back in semi-finals. And I think if any man is going to get us over the line, I think it's going to be Liam Cal. But I think it's crucial. It's crucial that he stays, and I think he will stay, because I think, look, he's hard. He's a Tipperary man. We've seen the success of Tipperary. And look, there's no doubt that Liam Cahill is going to be a future Tipperary manager. But I would just hope that he will be the Waterford manager for the next 2 years. And then possibly, look, I don't think anyone within Waterford would cry out loud if Liam Cahill was going to go to Tipperary in 2 years' time. And I think, you look at the both setups, Waterford and Tipperary. Would you go in and take over Tipperary at the present moment in time, a bit like Kilkenny? I wouldn't. So I think Liam Cahill, I think he'll assess everything, and he'll see the type of job he's had to do in the last 2 years. He'll reflect on it, on where he's after bringing this Waterford team in such a short space of time. And usually it's possible. Sometimes it's year 3 when a new manager comes in before you'll see, the perfection of what he wants to achieve. And I think we're not too far away. We're getting there. And please God, in the next year or two, if Liam Cahill stays, who knows? I think he might get us over the line.
Yeah, there's a few managers whose futures will be very interesting to watch over the next few weeks. So, Michael, from a Limerick perspective, then looking ahead to that final, how close to top speed were they against Waterford? Is that Limerick at their best for you? Is there any kind of chinks in the armour from what you've seen, or are they motoring at kind of their peak at the moment?
Yeah, they weren't far off their best. Will just going through player ratings from the game the other night. Like if Peter Casey hadn't been sent off, he wouldn't have been the 6 that I gave him, or that when he gets sent off in the Ireland semi-final, you probably have to take a mark or 2 off. But the rest of them were at a very, very high level. A lot of 8s out of 10. Nicky Quaid, brilliant again. Dan Morrissey played his first full game. Probably in about 2 months, I'd say. Was solid as a rock, a full back. They were so efficient with what they were doing. Fair enough, they did a decent few wides in the second half, but they just know exactly what they're doing. Particularly the ball going into the forward line. Flanagan has this over the shoulder effort, absolutely down to a T. He's just so hard to handle. He's able to get out in front. They play a lovely diagonal ball across from Burns and Hayes. I think they're motoring close to top speed at the moment, and I had some doubts kind of coming into this game, that we were maybe been blinkered by that 20 minutes against Tipperary, that apart from that and maybe the first half against Cork in the league, we hadn't seen Limerick at full tilt, but they're definitely edging closer. Tom Morrissey again, 5 points again the other day. I don't know what it is with him in All-Ireland semi-finals. He just seems to always stand up in semi-finals in particular. If Casey's out, that means Mulcahy maybe comes in. That robs an option off the bench. Their bench already looked somewhat light. Dermot Burns looked like he rolled his ankle. He could be a doubt. Barry Nash came off late. He could be a doubt as well. All of a sudden, there could be, questions about Limerick coming into the final. I think that just adds another layer of intrigue going into the final as well. And
Frank, they are big favourites as well. I think they're into 2-7. Have you been impressed with? They seem to be wearing the favourites tie quite lightly this season. Obviously they lost to Kilkenny in 2019 as champions. They have never done back-to-back as a county, but it doesn't seem to be burdening them overly. I suppose we won't know until the All-Ireland has been won, but at this stage they do seem to be carrying it quite well.
Very much so. And John Kiley made a point on Saturday night that the thing that has pleased him most is their incremental improvement, that he's seen a step up game to game right through the season. And that's carried from league probably into championship. They were, I don't know if I'd call it, but they were actually vulnerable enough against Cork in Munster. There was a period in the second half in that game where I think there were maybe 4 points up thereabouts, and you were waiting for Cork to get the next score, which they should have done at several occasions, to turn up the heat on them, and they never did, and Limerick pulled away easily. But obviously there was the kind of Jekyll and Hyde performance against Tip in the Munster final, but they really upped it in the second half that day, and they carried that form for the most part through Saturday's semi-final. But the option, the issue of, if they need their bench is probably the really fascinating thing, because he didn't need it on Saturday. And I'm just looking at the match programme here. I think the first change for Limerick came after 66 minutes, and he made 5 substitutions from there to the finish. So that just tells you he was getting guys out onto the pitch. Obviously, Barry Nash got injured, so there was a different issue there. But it will be very, very hard for Peter Casey to overturn that red card, because you've got to remember, in a case like this, it's not that you're looking for that Limerick need a video to place a question mark over the red card. They actually need a video to conclusively prove that, he should not be sent off, that there was not, a striking, be it with the head in this case, situation. So the videos they're kind of grainy enough, and they don't tell us maybe the complete picture, but that won't be enough for Limerick. They have to prove that he should not have been sent off in the first place. So if he's gone and Graham Mulcahy comes in, he'd be the obvious choice. But, Mulcahy hasn't been playing. It's been fits and starts from him this year. I think he had injury issues, obviously, earlier on. But, he doesn't look the player that he was maybe 2 years ago. So there might be questions asked of that Limerick bench when it comes to it. But you still have to go back to the fact they're favourites for a reason, for lots of reasons. And we still don't know whether Cork are going to be able to live with them physically and in every other way tactically when it comes to the final. And Limerick may not need their bench.
Well, John, I might give you the last word then. 2 weeks out from that final, Cork versus Limerick. What's your read on it? I suppose from a Cork perspective, they can at least point to, drawing with them in 2018 in the Munster group stage, drawing with them in the semi-final, albeit losing after extra time, beating them in 2019 in the group stage, and obviously losing this year, but leading in the first half and missing a penalty when the game was in the melting pot. So there's a few signs there that maybe they could trouble them, but what's your read on it now?
Well, Cork are Cork. Tradition is tradition. And, while all us pundits, everyone in the media circles, everyone in the outside of both camps, outside the Cork camp, will all be tipping Limerick. Well, Cork in a final, going into a final, it's Limerick. They won't care less about Limerick. That's been straight. I'll tell you what now, the way Cork would see Limerick, albeit this is a great Limerick team, but Cork would see Limerick as a Waterford, a Clare. That there's always this belief that we are the rebels, we are Cork, they are Limerick. And whilst other counties would possibly go up hoping to beat Limerick, within that circle, within that camp, they'll be, and within Cork County as a whole, they'll be good up believing we are Cork, we're going to go up and we're going to beat Limerick. And that's why I would give them every chance in the final. They'll think Limerick are deserving favourites, but Cork in a final, tradition behind them. I was at that match in the Munster semi-final. Anything that possibly could have went wrong for Cork went wrong, and a bit like Waterford, I think everything is going to have to go their way. But they're the one county that I think Limerick will possibly fear going into this final, and I think this will be an awful lot closer than many people think, and I think it's going to be a mouth-watering final. It's one that I'm really looking forward to.
John had his Mystic Mullane hat on there a couple of weeks ago when he predicted that at 16-1 that Cork were the bet to get back to the final or get back to the All-Ireland. So we'll see whether he puts his he nails his colours to the mast over the next couple of weeks now.
Yeah, I actually think Limerick would definitely prefer to have played Kilkenny in the final for lots of different reasons. I think they'll be more worried by the threat Cork pose. And I think Kilkenny would have been the ideal fixture for Kiley as well going in. The team that stopped them in 19, we have a job to do here. Cork pose lots of different questions and maybe more troublesome ones as well for Limerick.
Well,
and just the last thing, Will, I just think on the Peter Casey thing, I think it's important from a Limerick point of view that they put it to bed early. Like you look at Waterford last 2 weeks ago with Conor Gleeson. They just put it to bed early that they weren't going to go down the route and try to get him off. And I think from a Limerick point of view, I think from John Kiley and the camp as a whole, I think they should try and put it to bed early and say, well, look, we're either going to appeal it or we're not going to appeal it. And I know when I was sent off in the Munster final in 2004, I just put it to bed early and said, look, you know what I done was a bit stupid and I'll take the punishment. And I just think in this case, it's going to be very hard on Peter Casey, and look, it's very hard on to miss the All-Ireland final. But I think if what we seen last night albeit there wasn't a whole lot in it, but there was a strike in action. I think it possibly Peter Casey himself and probably John Kiley, I think they should put it to bed early and say, look, you know what, we're not going to appeal it and just focus on the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, well, one of the many talking points that'll be, debated over the next couple of weeks. But for the moment, John, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, what I will.
Well, we're now going to look ahead to the All-Ireland Football semi-finals on the Throw-In podcast in association with Bord Gáis Energy. A little bit of uncertainty around Kerry Tyrone at the moment, Michael. I suppose, a few COVID cases in Tyrone camp. There's talk that the game might be postponed. So at this stage, there's probably not a whole pile of reasons maybe to delve into this too much. But if it does get postponed, it would be a very interesting wrinkle in the football championship. You don't know if Tyrone, how fit they would be, but even just, messing up people's schedules, it would be an unusual and an interesting one.
Yeah, coming hot on the heels on an All-Ireland semi-final, been delayed by 30 minutes because of hay bales all over the M7. Anything can happen this year, it looks like it. But it would definitely upset plans for both squads. Obviously, Tyrone squad more so. They already have overcome the fact that they were missing Fergal Logan and 3 high-profile players for the Ulster final, which I think was a fair achievement from them. And I think Tyrone, like whenever this game is played, providing that training and preparations aren't seriously impeded or interrupted, I think they're coming in an ideal position at a right good test in the Ulster final. Seriously good test. They're playing a Kerry team that absolutely blitzed them in the league. It was their worst probably concession defensively in their history. I think the most goals they've conceded in any sort of a meaningful game. So they will definitely have a chip on their shoulder. I'm sure they will have learned an awful lot from that game. Will have forensically analysed Kerry and what they need to do to stop Kerry getting into that kind of free-flowing system. Providing they have the preparation time they need collectively as a full squad, I think that's a really, really interesting game. Seriously interesting game. And again, the pressure is now on Kerry. They're now All-Ireland favourites. The team going for 7 in a row are not favourites. Kerry are favourites based on league and championship form this year. And it's going to be really interesting to see how they deal with that expectation. And I think that game will be very, very tight whenever it is played.
And if it is kicked on by a week, it would mean 4 weeks for Kerry since their previous game, kind of a fairly straightforward win over Cork. So that might play into it as well. May they be slightly rusty? Possibly. It's hard to know. But we might kick on with Dublin Mayo, Frank, given that the Kerry Tyrone game has a bit of a question mark on it. How are you approaching this game? It's funny, like Dublin do appear as vulnerable as they have been probably since before the Jim Gavin era, but at the same time, they're still favourites, decent favourites in the bookies to beat Mayo. How are you approaching this game? Or do you think an upset is on the cards potentially?
Well, more so than I would have thought a few weeks ago. Put it that way. I mean, when Killian O'Connor injured his Achilles, we're not too sure of the precise nature of it, in that league game against Clare, I would have thought, my God, I just can't see how Mayo can even possibly bridge the gap. But their form since then has been pretty decent for the most part, bar the first half, maybe you'd say, against Galway in the Connacht final. And the real issue has been Dublin's form, because, I mean, you know what, their form graph right through Leinster was very un-Dublin-like. They were very good in the first half against Meath. They were never going to lose the match against Kildare. But you still have to go back to the fact that they won their 3 matches by single-digit margins. And this is coming from a base where they were winning their matches in Leinster over the last few years by somewhere between 15 and 20 points most of the time. The average was I think it could have been 16, 17, 18 points. So, Dublin do not look the force that they were 2-3 years ago. There's been one of the biggest issues is their bench. Their bench is unrecognisable to what it was, a few years ago when it was populated by multiple former All-Stars, former footballers of the year, players that you knew could, you'd seen before and they could deliver something. We don't have that sense anymore. But if they're key men, if Brian Fenton, Ciarán Kilkenny, Conor O'Callaghan, if they bring their A game to Croke Park next weekend, and if John Small and Owen Murchan are both fit to start, I mean, John Small started the last day, they're going to be still start as warm favourites, I would say. But it is this is going to be I would view this as the first real test for Dublin this year. And in that I include the match against Meath, where at one point it came back to 3 points. But that, there still wasn't a sense that Dublin were going to lose that game. And they definitely should not have been in a position where they were only 3 points ahead, with a few minutes remaining. So, as ever, Dublin Mayo, it's always fascinating. You're always, the other thing is that Mayo, you would imagine, will try to put pressure on Evan Comerford's kick out, something Kildare just never attempted to do in the Leinster final. So how that plays out is going to be fascinating.
Just Will, an interesting point, something Frank said there, and it's probably to do with their bench and even just about Dublin being different this year. So we obviously had the COVID training story earlier on in the year, which is not your typical Dublin story or not your typical thing to happen within a Dublin setup. That was one. Then you have the whole Stephen Cluxton scenario on how much that has dragged on, and will he, won't he return? Obviously he's not going to return at this stage, but that just dragged on. It's very uncharacteristic of Dublin. Even after in recent games, Desi Farrell revealed that Kevin McMahon was over in Tokyo in his role as psychologist or performance psychologist with the Irish boxers, which I thought was interesting. Philly McMahon was up to in the media last week, and he was saying that he didn't know whether he'd be around for the All-Ireland semi-final because of Bohemians playing in Europe and his involvement with them. And I just think there's a lot of quite strange things happening within Dublin that you just wouldn't see, these things wouldn't be left to chance in previous years. And I think it's all feeding into a narrative of that maybe things just aren't the same in Dublin. I would agree with Frank though, someone is still going to have to go and beat them. And if Kilkenny, Howard, Conn and Fenton all play to a high level, they're going to be so hard beaten. But it does look somewhat like the writing is on the wall. But would it be that far-fetched of a scenario to see, Dublin beating Mayo at the weekend and all the talk about Kerry and all this talk and somehow Tyrone causing an upset in the other semi-final? I don't think it would be. But there's never probably been more questions asked going into an All-Ireland semi-final than this year, when you're looking at, the 7 in a row chasing a Dublin side are not favourites, but that could quickly change after this weekend.
Yeah, one kind of comparison I was thinking of was the kind of the second 3 in a row for Mick O'Dwyer and Kerry, whereby Dublin were favourites going into the final in '84, but Kerry still had that spine of Mikey Sheehy, Spillane, O'Shea, and those guys weren't ready yet to cede control. Now, there's obviously not complete comparisons, but as you say, as Frank mentioned, that spine of, McCarthy, Fenton, Kilkenny, Conor O'Callaghan, these guys are, if you're doing a draft of the two teams, are probably going to be featuring fairly prominently among the top picks. But I suppose, Frank, it's a bit of a testament to Mayo and James Horan's rebuilding job that even with Cillian O'Connor missing, as you say, that there's still people are giving them a real chance. Like some of the young guys he brought in last year, even Oisin Mullins looks to have kicked on again after his All-Star last year. Even Tommy Conroy looks to have filled out a bit more. Like he probably got lost a bit in the physical stakes in the final last year. Ryan O'Donnell's had a good year as well. Matthew Rowan looks to have taken another step forward too. Some of these guys who have kind of taken over from the guys who retired and then some of the other veterans in the team.
It's been a very impressive rebuilding job by James Horan when you consider all the kind of the decorated Mayo veterans, who have retired and departed over the last winter and even before that. The team has evolved pretty dramatically in this period. And still Horan has, he's re-established the whip hand over Galway, which they had lost for a number of years. He's got them to an All-Ireland semi-final in 19. And I suppose we shouldn't forget that I think Mayo were ahead at halftime in that game. They caused lots of trouble for Dublin before their 10-minute blitz after the break that day. And they got to an All-Ireland final last year when people didn't expect to see it happening. When given the makeup of the team and the number of rookies who had come into the starting 15. I mean, those young guys look physically better developed this year. They look stronger. They look a bit more confident. I think even they've been able to locate Oisin Mullen more as a halfback probably than a fullback this year. That's helped. And their running game has the potential to cause Dublin trouble, without a doubt. If Paddy Durkin and Nushing Mullane and guys like that, Matthew Rowan as well, I mean, he's come back to form brilliantly. If they can get the running game up to speed, you know, they will ask questions of Dublin without a shadow of a doubt. I still wonder, will it come down to that we haven't seen it yet, but they may end up really ruining the loss of Cillian O'Connor, not just for his ability on frees. People talk about some of the frees he's missed late on against Dublin, but like his scoring returns against Dublin in the All-Ireland series have been sensational, but also as a focal point for the full forward line. And they were missing that in the first half against Galway the last day. They sorted it out pretty impressively thereafter. But that would be one niggling concern I would have for them.
It's certainly set up to be an interesting game on a Saturday evening throw-in as well. We might go for predictions then, Michael. I might go to you first. So we don't know if Kerry Tyrone is going ahead, but we'll operate at the moment that it is. Who do you see coming out in that one and in the Dublin Mayo game?
I think Kerry Tyrone will be far tighter than a lot of people think. I think Kerry will just about get over the line, and I think actually for them to go through to the final, I think the last thing they need is any sort of a comprehensive win. I think if they were really put to their pin or the collar and got through by a score, I think that would actually serve them best in the final. And I think Dublin will raise their performance a couple of levels on what we've seen so far, and will just about have enough. But the real interesting thing is, like, it does look like Mayo will have opportunities. Like, imagine, like, if Mayo were the ones to put the nail in the coffin of this Dublin side, it would be somewhat poetic in one way, given all the hardship that they've suffered at their hands. But I do think Dublin will just about see it out, and I expect a massive improvement, and especially from the likes of Con. I think Con will have a big impact, and I think he could be the difference maker.
Yeah, his last two performances against Mayo were pretty impressive. I think he might have been man of the match in both of them. Frank, the two predictions from you then?
Yeah, I think you have to stick with Dublin, in fairness. I mean, they may have lost their All-Ireland favourites tag, but like from early on in the season, I had an inkling, look, if they're going to be stopped, I had a feeling that maybe this could be Kerry's year. I probably still think that, not with huge conviction, but I think Dublin will win against Mayo. Possibly coming from behind, they may have to, I think some serious questions will be asked of them, and they will need a step up from Brian Fenton, whose form has been scratchy enough so far this year. Con had, I'd say, one of his poorest games for Dublin in the Leinster final, but we know there's so much more in him. And I think if Howard and Small are involved, it frees up options for where they can play Brian Howard and James McCarthy potentially as well. So I think Dublin will win, not at their ease. And I'm sticking with Kerry to beat Tyrone, presuming that game does go ahead this weekend. Kerry were very, very poor for the first 15, 20 minutes against Cork. And it's hard to read too much into what happened thereafter, because Cork just kind of put up the white flag, I thought. But Kerry are operating at a different level than they were last year. Their younger defenders are physically stronger. They look more of a team, and they're going at the opposition way more than they were last year. Paddy Clifford has been a huge addition. Shawnee O'Shea's form has been really, really good from the get-go this year. And they destroyed Cork with David Clifford not even scoring from play. So, they're not a one-man team. They're definitely not a one-man forward line. So I'll stick with Kerry in that.
I'll set it to be a very intriguing semi-final weekend. I'd like to thank Michael and Frank for joining me today, as well as John Mullane for joining me earlier. And that's all we have time for on the Throw-In podcast this week in association with Bord Gáis Energy. We'll be back next week with another podcast reviewing the football semi-final action. And in the meantime, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, or listen on independent.ie. So until next time, thanks for listening and goodbye.
Bord Gáis Energy, proud sponsors of the GAA All-Ireland Senior Hurling Championship and GAA Legends Tour Series of Croke Park. #hurling to the core.